Welcome to Kindred, hosted by me, Kate, and my sister, Jen. In this podcast, we explore our human relationship to the natural world. In connecting to this planet, we also connect to understanding, compassion, and empathy. How can we see ourselves not as separate or above animals in nature, but a critical and integrated part of an active ecosystem? Through conversations with animal advocates, scientists, conservationists, and many others, we look to inspire a new awareness of how and why we connect to animals and nature in order to repair and restore our relationship to the natural world. Hello and welcome back to Kindred. How are you today, sister?
I'm well.
Yeah.
How are you today?
I'm good. I'm just going to tell our listeners that we just had a big fight and that you yelled at me because I wasn't allowed to eat a mushroom that I wanted to eat. So,
Because I don't want you to die. Thank you. You're welcome.
So I think what we need to do is have a guest on that can talk us through how to find out what we're allowed to eat outside, what we're not. And I follow this woman on Instagram. Her name is Alexis Nicole, and her handle, is that what that's called?
That's what that's called, yeah.
Is Black Forager, and she loves mushrooms and she talks all about them. So I am going to look through her feed and see, but I promised you I would not eat the dumb mushroom.
Yeah.
It's like the size of my head. It's enormous, and it says it has a nutty tofu-like flavor.
I think you must to eat that anyway. Come on. What would you do? Freeze it? I mean, good grief. Or just chop it down in its prime and just waste the parts because you would eat
Maybe
like
what I'll do is I'll pull it up because it's right by the road and the deer would probably eat it. So I'll go put it on the part of the property that they are safe to eat it. So I'll pull it up and take it over there. It's huge. It's so cool.
Sure.
So if you're listening, Black Forager, please write in and tell us call in, even though we don't have a hot tip line. Let us know.
Email. If you have an email, you could be
called the puffball. Giant puffball. Or in other words, I would call it Mushroomous gigantica. That's what I would call it. That's what I think that should be called.
Okay. Maybe they'll read it now.
I promise I won't eat any mushrooms though, because people die all the time from eating them because they don't do their due diligence. They just eat them and they die.
And to people's credit, there are very many that look very, very similar. There's one little difference between the deadly ones and the not deadly ones. So that's why just buy them at your grocery store. That's my just public service announcement for today.
All right. Well, when you're trying to get back in touch with nature, it's one way to do it is eat it. So just
you can eat other shit and just don't eat mushrooms.
Real kindred over here. So, Anyway, on to our guest today, which has nothing to do with mushrooms, even at all. Although there are many mushrooms that look very different. Anyway, on to our guest today, which she has no connection to mushrooms or any of the like. But I would say, have actually a distinguished guest today, which is really exciting. We are speaking with Dr. Elaine Ostrander, who is Chief and Distinguished Senior Investigator of the Cancer Genetics and Comparative Genomics branch at the National Human Genome Research Institute of the NIH.
That's quite a title.
Yes. She also heads the section of comparative genetics. And the NIH is the National Institutes of Health here in the US in Maryland. And today we are speaking with Elaine about morphology and why is it that even though dogs are made up of 99.9% wolf DNA, dogs don't look at all like each other a lot of the time or like wolves. So why is it that the Great Dane and the Chihuahua can look so different if they share all that DNA, right? So the definition of morphology from the Oxford Dictionary is the branch of biology that deals with the form of living organisms and with relationships between their structures. So why do some dogs have long noses or short legs or long black hair or are tiny or large, etc. But don't worry, because Dr. Ostrander gives us her expert definition of morphology, which is better than mine or Oxford's, in my opinion. And you can find more about her and her research and her lab via the NIH website, which is irp.nih.gov. So this has been a question of mine for a very long time. And I'm so grateful to Elaine for breaking this all down in a way that my brain can actually grasp. She did a wonderful job of walking us through the history and what morphology is all about. So I'm really excited about this interview. So we are going to head on over to that, and we'll see you guys at the takeaway. Elaine, welcome. Thank you for joining us so much today. Would you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Sure, I'm happy to. So I'm Elaine Ostrander, and I am the chief of the Cancer Genetics and the Comparative Genomics branch at the National Human Genome Research Institute. And so that's one of the institutes at the National Institutes of Health. And I oversee a branch of people who are working on everything from tumor growth to genetics of cancer susceptibility to model organisms. And so my own lab is focused on canine genetics. And so we study all things that are interesting about dogs, which is pretty much everything as far as I'm concerned. So the genomics, the genetics, their morphology, their behavior, their origins. Have been people in my lab that are interested in questions related to all of those things.
Well, that's great because we are too. But before we jump in, could you just give us two definitions? Could you give us the definition of genomics and morphology?
Sure. And these aren't going to be textbook definitions. They're more functional.
Great.
So when I think about genomics, I think about the genetic material in the cell that dictates the traits around us. So how tall we are, how short we are, our behavior, or a subset of our behaviors, pretty much our susceptibility to various diseases. Much of that is controlled by genes that are in every cell in the body. And all of that architecture, the genes and everything else that goes along with it, we refer to as genomics. And genomics is the study of all those different things. So we're often trying to connect a trait with something in the genome sequence, those A's and T's and C's and G's. And that meshing, that analysis, we broadly refer to as genomics. So I gave morphology as one of those examples. And so morphology has to do with the shape of things. And so, again, we broadly define the word shape. So it can be as simple as comparing the number of legs across a couple of species. It can be body size. It can be skull shape. It can be absolutely anything that we use to differentiate individuals, members of a species, or across species when we talk about measurements, things that we can measure, things that we can look at and we can define. All of those things, broadly speaking, we think of as morphology. We don't, for instance, think of your susceptibility to a disease as part of morphology, right? But we would think about your height as something that we would call morphology.
Okay, well, I really appreciate the breakdown of those two definitions. Thank you, because that helps us just sort of, set the foundation for today. So I always hear that dogs are like 99.9% wolf DNA, and so how is it that a bulldog and a whippet not only don't look like wolves, but they present so drastically different from each other?
So I think the first thing that's important to remember is that dogs were domesticated from wolves only about 30,000 years ago. And when we think about the great span of evolution, that is not even a drop in the bucket. That is a tiny, 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 tiny amount of time.
Right.
And when we think about going to the dog park and looking at the array of breeds that are running around at the dog park, it's equally important to remember that most, not all, but a large number of breeds were developed in Europe during Victorian times. So a lot of the breeds you see running around the dog park, they've only been around for a couple hundred years. So that is not even a gazillionth of a drop in an evolutionary bucket. So where does all of this come from? How did all of this happen? So domestication of dogs is not a single moment in time. It's several moments in time, 15, 20, 30,000 years ago. And there's certainly some debate as to how many major domestication events there were and where in the world that they took place. But what is clear is that one of the things that was very important was, as we emerged, as humans emerged, and we were hunter-gatherers, and then we were an agrarian society, and our needs changed. We needed animals to help us. We needed animals to help us hunt. We needed them to guard our flocks. We needed them to guard our homes. We needed them as companions, which of course is a huge, huge occupation for dogs of today. So the selection on the part of humans has been enormous, right? Because if you don't guard me or you don't guard my flock, I could die, and that's bad. So right. The selection for animals that have certain physical attributes or certain behavioral traits has been very, very strong and related to our survival. So our tolerance early on for things that don't meet our standard is actually very, very little. When we look at dog breeds, it's important to remember that all breeds are members of the same species. They're all Canis lupus familiaris. So even though, the Great Dane and the Chihuahua and the standard poodle and the Basset Hound just look so different, right. They basically all have the same DNA, right? And so there are variants, though, in genes that make the legs longer or shorter, or the fur white, or the fur black, or the fur spotted, or the head very brachycephalic, which is a term that means sort of a pushed-in nose, versus dolichocephalic, which means that elongated nose you see in hounds. So it's the same complement of genes. They line up in all the same ways when we line up DNA from breed to breed to breed to breed to breed. It's very easy to move back and forth between the genomes or the array of genes in different breeds. But you find these nuanced changes in this gene or in that gene, in a gene that's important in coat color, in a gene that's important in body size, in a gene that does this, a gene that does that. And as fanciers, especially a couple hundred years ago, there's really strong selection. We wanted to make a breed that looked like a this, but had a black coat, that looked like a that, but was bigger, that looked like a this, but was a lot smaller.
That's fascinating.
And so the selection to make new breeds has always been very, very, very strong. And that's why we get this amazing smorgasbord in such a very short period of time.
In such a short period of time. And, in another episode, just kind of going back to what we were talking about the 30,000 years ago, we spoke with an archaeologist named Charlotte Frusen from the University College London about, ancient remains of wolves and then dogs buried with or near Homo sapiens. So in terms of the ancient DNA and morphology, do we need to go back then 30,000 years or, it's like that was 300,000 years ago, but.
Absolutely. So the whole field of ancient DNA and canine is just really exploding right now. And in part, that's because the technology now exists to isolate nuclear DNA, so DNA from the cell with all the genes, from various bones or various tissue. Well, mainly it's going to be bones. Let's face it, 30,000 years old. It's going to be bones, right?
Right.
And determine DNA sequence. And so we can look at what was the order of the A's and T's and C's and genes in a particular gene, and we can compare them from archaeologic findings from 30, 40, 50,000 years ago to what we see today in wolves and dogs and coyotes and jackals across different breeds, across breeds that share certain characteristics. So enthusiasm for using ancient DNA as a platform, sort of jump off and understand not just all the dogs running around at the dog park and not just domestication. So what was under selection in order to turn those wolves into the lap dog sitting on your lap? What were the behavioral changes? But also to understand us as a society. Where did we migrate to? Where did we come from? What did we bring with us? Were we agrarian at that point? Were we hunters at that point? We're learning so much about ourselves by studying ancient DNA in canids. Enthusiasm is so incredibly high.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really fascinating.
So cool. That's so cool that you can do that. Yeah.
Right. So then thinking of that, taking us back to like how all this happened, so much of this happened, like you were saying, in Victorian times. Have dogs become what they are today? And context to morphology strictly due to humans manipulating canine genes through breeding them? I mean, because like you're saying, if you think in terms of wolves or like the African wild dogs, they've looked very much the same.
Yeah. So in Victorian times, there was really an explosion of interest in developing lineages or breeds as we know them that had particular traits. And so when we study the history of a given breed, we learn that a lot of different things contribute to that breed. So sometimes dogs from other breeds were crossed. Sometimes in a given litter, there was one dog that had a really attractive attribute. It looked like a much smaller version of this, or it had a black coat, or it had a different ear shape that was very attractive, that a fancier would then select on that one over and over and over. Right. We see popular sires, and that's something we still see today. And that's a concept that's been around for a couple hundred years. The idea being, if there's one, usually a male dog, who primo has attributes that you really want to see in your breed or even in a new breed that you are creating, that individual will be bred many, 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 many times. And whatever their attributes are, good and bad, will quickly flood through the breed. And we see that happens, many times in the history of a breed. If a dog wins at a dog show, at a big dog show at Crufts or one of the biggies, right? You can bet that male dog, there'll be a lot of sperm frozen on that dog, and that sperm will then be used in subsequent matings. And it's important to realize that in the dog world, progeny of artificial insemination can be registered and shown, and they're on equal footing with every other dog out there. And that's different, for instance, than in the thoroughbred horse racing world, where artificial insemination, where it's different. The progeny of artificial insemination have a different status. And so all those things come together: popular sires, crossing in individuals of different breeds, and selection when you see a particular dog with traits that you really want. Those have all come together to make the 350 breeds we see running around today,
Just incredible to me. So,
well, keep in mind that behavior is a big player here, right? So
for sure.
So in the US, we tend to think about what dogs look like, and then we set aside end herding dogs or end hunting dogs, right?
Right.
But throughout the rest of the world, behavior has been such a huge player, and early on, such a huge player in the development of breeds, where particular breeds or even just niche populations living somewhere in the world have become very important to a very small community, perhaps an isolated community. We've studied one in Patagonia where the herding dogs, which aren't a registered breed, are very important to the survival of people living in that mountainous region of Chile, right? Yeah. So all of those things come together.
In terms of selecting things, and you said the genes, the good and the bad, get passed along. So when you hear about things like all of a sudden a breed, they say, oh, that's because of overbreeding, like this dog got a little too neurotic, or that one got a little too aggressive, or whatever. That's the downside of doing what you're talking about?
Such an important question, right? You'll hear about a breed for decades that has been deemed a super healthy from the genetic viewpoint breed. And then suddenly you'll hear, oh, that breed has a lot of this kind of cancer or a lot of epilepsy, or hips have gotten really bad. There's a lot of hip dysplasia in that breed. And it can be for a number of different reasons. It can be because there have been some very popular lines of dogs or very popular individuals who have been bred, and their variants, their genetic variants have been widely distributed in the breed. And so, the chances are, as you keep crossing individual to individual, that you're going to get individuals who got a negative allele from mom and a negative variant from dad, and Shazam, they have that disease. And as there's more redundancy in individuals who contribute to the breeding pool, that absolutely does happen. And by the same token, it can sometimes happen sporadically. I mean, happens in humans sporadically, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody gets born with a bad disease, or there are some mutations that occur in some genes, and that dog is bred. People don't realize it has these negative traits because maybe it's a disease of late onset, like cancer.
Right.
So by the time the dog is 10 years old and the cancer's popped up, hey, it could have had lots and lots of litters, and the breeders have done absolutely nothing wrong, right? So the really good news about all of that, though, is that a lot's changed in the dog breeding world since I got involved 25 years ago. And one is that breeders have become really good geneticists.
Yeah.
And they want genetic testing. They want us to figure out what are the genes and variants that are contributing to that epilepsy, that cancer, those bad hips, that whatever it is. They want us to find those genes, and then they want to offer genetic testing. They want breeders, owners to embrace genetic testing and use it, not to throw everybody who has any bad DNA variant out of the population, because then you'd be left with nothing, right?
Right.
But to just use it to design, the best breedings to get the healthiest dogs. And that's been really exciting. There are companies that have sprung up everywhere that offer genetic testing for a myriad of different diseases, different traits. And the idea that breeders really understand now that everybody's genome has good and bad things in it. And the trick is to figure out what the DNA changes are that are bad or deleterious, and then set up really structured breedings to iteratively improve the health of that breed. And you see it, you absolutely see it. You see breeders being very savvy, and you see the dilution of particular diseases over generations, and now we're seeing it over decades. And that's really exciting. That's really great. The breed looks just like it did 25 years ago.
Right.
It's healthier.
Yeah, that's great. That's great news. That's awesome.
Good news. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that, though, is there's still a lot of diseases out there for which we don't understand the genetics. And I will say, breed clubs, they come to us and say, find my disease gene. What do I have to do? I'll give you samples from hundreds and hundreds of dogs. And I'm like, please don't send me samples from hundreds and hundreds of dogs. I don't work on heart disease. I wouldn't be able to help you anyway. But here's someone that will help you. So one of the things I really like about our community is it's very collaborative. And that's not true of all the companion animal communities or all the domestic animal communities. But this is a community where people will say, I don't do that, but go talk to them. And if I get the appropriate paperwork, I'll send any samples that come my way to them, because I want them to succeed. I want them to get a fancy paper. I want them to find your disease gene. Mm-hmm. And there have been times where breeders have come to me and said, I have 100 samples of dogs who have disease, blah. And I say, I don't work on that. And they say, well, what do we do? And I said, you know what? I'll isolate the DNA and I'll store them in my freezer. And the day you decide where you want it to go, I'll ship it there, all at my lab's expense. Because I feel like we have that responsibility, right? We're at the National Institutes of Health. right? These are all diseases that humans get, that we
That's
care
right.
about human health and biology. So it's my job, it's my responsibility to say, hey, yeah, let me store those, because someday these 100 samples are going to matter to man, and they're going to matter to man's best friend. So I want to do that for you.
That's awesome.
I find it fascinating to think about, like, going back, you had talked about, how much we can learn about ourselves through this. And I love what you're talking about, the collaborative community that you're working in. That is really exciting to hear. And, but thinking about, how much we can learn about human culture and society based on morphology in canine genomes. People breed for what they need or want. And, talking about archaeology, with certain traits, we can walk that back and learn about what humans were doing with those dogs at that specific time sometimes. But let's talk about, like, in terms of human health, what do we learn from studying the health of dogs today?
Oh, we learned so much. I think we're in our heyday right now. So I think every article about canine genetics starts with a paragraph that says, basically all the diseases humans get, dogs get, whether it's cancer or epilepsy or heart disease, or, and then they'll be specific. If you're an expert in cardiac disease, you'll start naming those diseases, tetralogy of Fallot and cardiomyopathy and da 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 da. If you're an expert in cancer, you'll say, yeah, humans and dogs get lymphoma, they get melanoma, they get tumors of the central nervous system, they get da 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 da. And so it really illustrates to human geneticists that, hey, our cancers are spontaneous, just like human cancers are. They're the same as what humans get. They manifest the same way humans get. You can often treat them with the same drugs. This isn't like studying mice where you have to induce a cancer and put in a virus and it's a different drug and their immune system is completely different. And it may or may not end up, having implications for human cancer. Fortunately, it does sometimes, but it doesn't always. And so what we say over and over is, if we can find the genes that make this or that breed susceptible to a particular disease, then we're giving you information about why humans are susceptible or get that same disease. And what's happening is it's proving true. Whew, thank goodness. But the diseases that we're finding,
That keeps you in your job, right?
I get to stay here, right? So whether you're studying cancer, heart disease, or neuromuscular diseases or whatever, the genes that are contributing to the disease in dogs, including to progression, things like in cancer, where progression is as big a deal as susceptibility is, are turning out to be relevant for humans as well. Now, you would think that would make you say, well, then why not just study it in humans? Why are you studying it in dogs? And the answer lies in one word: breeds. So if you think about this, think about a disease like bladder cancer, okay? Big deal in humans, big deal in dogs. In dogs, there are a small number of really, really, really susceptible breeds, like the Scottish Terrier. If you're a Scottish Terrier walking down the street, your chances of getting bladder cancer are 22-fold higher than the average mixed breed dog walking down the street. 22-fold higher. You've got some serious susceptibility genetics.
Right.
And guess who else? Guess who else is susceptible? The very closely related West Highland White Terrier. Okay. They've got about a 5-fold increased risk. So what you can do in the canine genetics world is you can group breeds that are historically related, that those people in the UK were developing a couple hundred years ago, right? And you can reasonably bet that they carry the same mutation in the same genes. But now you have a lot of power because they've been separated at some point in time. They're different breeds. They look different a little bit. They act different. And so you can compare their genomes and say, okay, across these 5-6 breeds, what are the commonalities? What are the differences? And it gives you a lot more statistical power for identifying candidates that are likely responsible for that gene, that disease. So it's this gene, this gene, this gene that we now think are viable candidates, because dogs come with labels, and that's their breed name. And we know a lot about how all the breeds came about. We know how they're related. So we know whose data to group together. Oh, okay, boxers, bull terriers, miniature bull terriers, bull mastiffs. Okay, we're going to group them together to look at disease N, because we know that they're going to share recent common ancestors. And so they're probably going to all share the same mutation.
Are you just saying that helps because then you can get way more data because there's so many breeds that can then apply to humans? Is that what you're saying?
So what I'm saying is that makes it much easier for us to find the disease genes, because humans don't come with those labels. If I took everybody on this call, it wouldn't be a particularly powerful data set, even if we were doubled and tripled and quadrupled and times by 100, right? Because our background population structure is pretty similar. Whereas dogs have been bred very tightly. To be a member of a breed, your parents had to be registered members of the same breed, and their parents registered members of the same breed. So each dog breed is a closed pool.
And it's all documented, right? So
that's
you can,
right.
Yeah.
And at some point they're separated. You know, the Scotty and the West Highland White Terrier and the this terrier and the that terrier. And I mean, there's I don't know how many terrier breeds, right? And so, but each one is a little bit different. So now I have a lot of power to go through their genome and say, okay, what do all the affected dogs of these terrier breeds have that unaffected dogs of these terrier breeds don't have? It gives me a lot of power to find the genes. I don't have that kind of advantage in doing human genetics. Now that we can sequence dog genomes so easily, which we do here at NIH, now we can just walk through their genomes and figure these things out, which has been great.
That's incredible. This is just so fascinating. So where and how does your lab get dog genomes in support of your research? I mean, do you want my mutt's DNA? I mean, talk to us about
that is a great question. So, so first of all, just to make clear to everyone, we don't breed dogs. We don't keep dogs in kennels. We don't do any experiments in dogs. We don't treat any dogs. My lab does citizen science. And so we have a great relationship with everybody out there who owns a dog that wants to come and talk to us. And so we're everywhere that there are dogs, ready with a cheek swab and a consent form if you'd like us to take a sample of your dog. Now, currently, we're pretty much just sampling purebred dogs because then we have their pedigrees. And so we can design our experiments appropriately, and we know who's related to who 3, 4, 5 generations.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we go to a lot of dog shows and we go to a lot of specialty events, obedience trials, Frisbee contests. I mean, and you know, Elaine, can I have permission to get a day off to go to a Frisbee contest? Will government be okay with that? As long as you come back with 100 samples, sure, that's fine. So
you don't go anywhere without your cheek swabs then. You just have them everywhere.
And sometimes we take blood samples, and we have collaborators all over the world, that we exchange samples with, of course, all with the appropriate approvals and consents. And so right now we're doing a lot of different things. We're mapping cancer genes. We're studying history of breeds and migration of humans. We're certainly starting to interface with people who study ancient DNA. But one thing we realized being here at the National Institutes of Health is that we needed to play a role in making reference data sets for everybody, studying all kinds of traits and diseases. And so together with other labs, we started a giant consortium to sequence thousands of canine genomes, and different labs are doing sequencing. We've done some, other people have done this, other people have done that. Data is being pooled. There's a group that's analyzing data. There's a group that's doing this with the data, a group that's doing that with the data. And so one of the things that is so interesting about this is all of the samples basically come from pet dogs. You know, that's where they're coming from. They do include some mixed breed dogs, and they do include some village dogs. So these are dogs that hang out outside on the outskirts of a village. They're associated with that village, maybe near the garbage dumps. They're not wild dogs, but you know, you wouldn't necessarily keep them in your house. And they give us information about that country or that region of the world. And so the idea is to try and take responsibility in our role as members of the National Institutes of Health to make things that we can put out there that can help other labs who are studying things we don't study, whether
Right.
it's, again, heart disease or central nervous system disorders or any of those sorts of things.
Right.
And so we have about 45,000 DNA samples all locked up tight. And vast majority of those, some have come from collaborators, but honestly, the vast majority have come from pet owners, people who write us, who talk to us, who go to our Facebook page. We give tons of talks at breed clubs, at neighborhood meetings, at international and national specialty events. I went once to talk at a Rottweiler specialty, and there in the parking lot were 400 Rottweilers. 400
Wow.
Rottweilers. Yeah.
Wow.
Everyone perfectly behaved, of course. Or I went once to a Scottish Deerhound specialty, and I walked into one hotel room, and one woman had 5 of these giant Scottish Deerhounds in her hotel room, all meticulously behaved, of course. And so anywhere there's dogs and people who are enthusiastic, then, we want to talk to you, and we want to try to help your breed. If not through us, then our work to other people.
Well, I love that. That's part of that collaborative community you were talking about. And I love that I'm citizen science is, wow, that's really stuck. I mean, I love that. And, if we look at society and where humans, are on the civilized timeline, it's so interesting from the perspective of morphology. And look at the conversation we've had just based on the look of an animal. And, I think in general, we are becoming a society that is connecting on a deeper level to animals, which means we value the dogs that are in our lives and our homes more, and they deserve this. I mean, we ask a lot of them, and they give us so much love and companionship. And I think, anything that we can learn, not just about them, but about ourselves, it just shows what an incredibly beautiful and reciprocal relationship we have on many levels.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because, when people first started to study dog behavior, they said, I'm going to look at anomalous behavior. I'm going to look at dogs with obsessive compulsive traits, or I'm going to look at super aggressive dogs, right? I'm going to look at anomalous behaviors. And then sort of the next generation of behavioral scientists and geneticists came along and said, no, you can do that, but I really want to understand why do herding dogs herd, why do pointers point, why do draft dogs pull, why do guard dogs guard? What's the underlying genetics? And then where did it come from? Is this something we see in wolves? Is this something we see 50,000 years ago? What's going on there? And I think that's where things are extremely exciting right now. But there's, as always, the next group, right, coming up. And they're really interested in the relationship that humans and dogs have and what genetics contributes to that.
Right.
And so there's a variety of really terrific labs, for instance, looking at sociability that dogs and humans have that humans and wolves don't have. What are the genes that make us form social interaction, social bond? Yeah. And there's another citizen science group who has done a massive survey effort of tens of thousands of dog owners, asking all sorts of nuanced questions about everything from, where your dog sleeps to how your dog communicates various needs to you, all sorts of things like that, and would like to start to address the genetics of some of that communication relationship that we have with our dogs. And underpinning all of that is our dog's ability to understand our needs and our wants and what we ask of them.
Yeah.
People will come in and say, I had a terrible day at work and my dog just knew and didn't run around the house like a crazy dog, like he usually does. He just came and put his head in my lap. You'll hear that over and over and over and over. And you'll hear hundreds of stories like that. And they all start with, my dog can read my mind. My dog knew what I was thinking. It was the strangest thing, but last Thursday, boy, my dog's a mind reader, right? And so they have this ability to make this connection. And I'm not a behavioral scientist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but there's at some level, we'd like to know how deeply they feel
Yeah.
And pet owners will, especially if they've had the same breed of dog their whole life,
Right.
they will tell us that there's a level at which they're feeling our sadness, or they're feeling our joy, or they're feeling our anxiety, and what that feels like for them as opposed to what it feels like for us. I think that's what the next generation of behavioral geneticists and dogs might be tackling. So.
Oh, and it's so interesting that you said how much, because I would never have thought of this, that by studying dog disease, you are learning more about human disease, because I wouldn't think that they're that closely relative to us genetically.
Oh, yeah.
That's what's fascinating to me, is like that that they aren't that far off. Like there's so much that can apply to humans from them.
Virtually every disease that humans get, dogs get. And I'm sure there'll be someone that who's listening will say, well, what about this or what about that? But in the big picture, yeah, right. For sure they do. And you see these genetic underpinnings or breed susceptibilities. And it's so interesting for someone like me who works in cancer. Boy, they can be treated with the same drugs, the same therapies. The response is often going to be exactly the same. Metastases, all those things are going to turn out to be the same. And so as new drugs are found in humans, they can be applicable to dogs. And as new drugs are found in the veterinary world, they can be things that humans think about as well. And what you just really need are to know those magic genes and magic proteins that direct your thinking. And I think that's where human genetics and canine genetics, and my lab does both. We study both humans and dogs, but that's where the interface comes. And that's what makes this so exciting and so synergistic right now.
Wow.
Well, that is just, and this is what we want to hear about this, because it applies to our lives and our personal lives. We aren't scientists, but, I think, between Jen and I, in the dogs we've had a lot of these diseases come through our lives and our homes. And so it's just such it's a very applicable conversation. And,
well, I'll challenge you on one thing when you say you're not geneticist, because I have to tell you, in the 25 years that I've been doing this, I've had so many dog owners call me with a description of something very subtle, very, very subtle. For instance, they'll say, well, it's really weird. I've had a lot of dogs get this particular cancer. It's happened in the poodle world, but we're only seeing it in one color of dogs. We never see it in the other colors of dogs. This is toenail cancer. And I'm like, that makes no sense. It must just be blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Ignore. Next phone call. So after a year, I'm thinking, really? Boy, okay, let me look at this, right? It turned out to be really interesting and to be a genetic pathway that was important in both coat color and in cancer susceptibility. And, it sort of broke open some new thinking that we hadn't really had before. But dog owners are actually really good observationists. Observationalists. And they will tell you, there's something genetic going on. I've bought dogs my whole life from this breeder, but my friend, she buys from these other breeders. And, there's this difference. There's this difference in how the disease looks, or the age at which the dogs get it. That's often a big one. My dogs seem to get this at 2 or 3. Her dogs get it at 8 or 9, right? They make these really great observations, and they're so generous in sharing them with us. Yeah. And they're so patient, right? Because I'll often say, oh, no, but thank you very much. And they'll say, well, I'm going to send you an article from our newsletter, or I'm going to send you some pictures, they're unbelievably patient with us, which, we say thank you. And we're very, very grateful for.
Well, I love that. Well, Elaine, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been just so fascinating. And I feel like I have another 100 questions. So maybe in another little while we can hit you up with some more questions. But thank you so much for your time. Sure. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Happy to help anytime. And hello to all the dog owners out there.
Hey guys, welcome back to The Takeaway. For Elaine Ostrander. Holy moly. So I feel like the short amount of time that we had with her, that we talked with her, and the amount that we got, my brain is still processing. And I listened to the interview again today. Because there just was a couple things I had to be like, wait, what? So one of the things that I thought was kind of astounding was that she said there are about 350 breeds today. And that's, I think, like AKC registered probably is
right.
Like,
yeah, I think that's probably what that means.
And that many, at first I thought she was talking about all those breeds came from the Victorians times, but I went back and looked. She said many of the breeds that we see today, like running around the dog park, were sort of created or bred during the Victorian times, which is because they were keenly interested in lineage and therefore selection. So that's so Victorian too, right? But
it really feels so classic. Yeah, like let's see how many different how about a little one? How about a round one? Yeah,
that's right.
Like it was the designer thing of that age or something, right? Yeah.
Fancy. They liked all kinds of fancy stuff. So I just feel like, though, it still is astounding. The rate that was able to happen is still just incredible as far as like genetics and evolution. If you look at it in evolutionary terms, it's just like they were dedicated. So I just thought that was very cool that from 30,000 years ago, she was talking about, where we kind of started ish, that then everything got like supercharged a few hundred years ago, honestly.
Right.
And then I just thought that was really cool. So I was talking with Kat, and she's an art history major, and she was saying it would be really cool to talk about morphology in context to art. And so here's the funny thing. If you look back at like medieval art and like going back that far, and you see pictures, dogs have been featured in art for many, many generations and centuries, right? So the funny thing is, I'm like, wow, they really kind of draw funny looking dogs or dogs that look very different from our dogs today. And the question is actually, were they drawing them accurately? Right? Yeah, because they actually look like that different. Like there's this one with a little head and like an Afghani body, but then it's just like, I don't know what you're looking at. So that was just something I thought was really interesting, is thinking about morphology in terms of art, which I thought was such a cool thing she brought up. And then you and I really love the citizen science and, the collaborative community. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. I was really impressed by how, because she loves this so much, she goes above and beyond too for people who reach out to her. And like when she talked about storing samples until she can figure out where it should get sent or whatever. Yeah. Just so cool that it's not my department, but if I stumble upon somebody who can use that, I will pass that along.
I love that too.
And that she doesn't have to do that, but she does it. Yeah, I just was impressed by that.
Cool. It just seems a little different to me too, but and just that she was talking about how you don't say you're a geneticist type thing, but she's like, people who have breed after breed, the same dog and within the same breed, she's like, they notice things. You do notice things on repeat, which I thought was, of course, because we are very in tune also with the visual and the experience of that. What does something look like? What are they doing? How are they acting? I thought that was
right. And dog lovers are very invested in their animals, and we are very observant of them. And so that's what she was saying. She does get a ton of information from dog owners. And
I thought that
and I loved the visual of her, when she said they go to like dog shows and all these different places and just having these little DNA swabs in a satchel. I just pictured her with a little satchel that's just bursting with these things. So do you mind if I swab your dog? I don't know.
So I think one of the biggest takeaways for me, which is something I've been aware of for a long time, just because I think dealing with the University of Pennsylvania and they're a teaching college and they do, there are labs there that a lot of the research they do with dogs does translate to people. And, in terms of, my first boxer, Lucy, she had heart disease, and, a lot of what she had is what people have. It's the same thing. And then my boxer, Leela, who had kidney disease, it's a lot of the same medications. It's a lot of the same therapies that you do with her. And then, Blue, who's here with me a lot when I record because he has epilepsy. So, and a lot of what we know about his epilepsy, we know from humans and vice versa. So I just thought it was something really important to talk about what we get, the knowledge and understanding of ourselves as humans, and even on a health level, is very connected to dogs, which is just interesting. And who kind of knows why, but it is. And you can break it down. She explained actually kind of why, but the fact that we do have so much, we have similar diseases, and there's this connection that it just really made me think a lot again about when people say, oh, it's just a dog, or, why would you spend that much money on your dog type thing? And it's like, well, because one, they truly are. Really, it's because we're so similar. I think we value it's a value thing too. We value them more because we have the same stuff, and because they are part of our family for sure. It's just that a family member you're gonna spend a lot of money on if they're ill, and the fact that we do know so much about, veterinary medicine has changed a lot in the last 50, 100 years, right? And you think about these connections that these scientists like Elaine are making, obviously not just with health, but, and health is just one part of her lab, but I just thought that was fascinating.
No. And interestingly also, like, you've always known this, that was brand new news to me. And I did not know that. Like, I know that, like we were saying, like, chimpanzees, or, a lot of, apes, we learn a lot of, they're very similar to us in their bodies, and maybe they have different diseases, but I just never really knew that about dogs. And what it made me think too is maybe that's just one more reason we feel so connected to them. It's just more of this thing that goes, even though I didn't know that, it's like, oh, that makes total sense that we can learn from them.
And then again, like, what can we learn about Homo sapiens, right? 300,000 years ago. What can we learn about ourselves on just another level because of these animals, and just the reciprocal relationship that we have with them? And in that, I think her work is just fascinating. We were spellbound the whole time. I was just like, oh my gosh, every word.
And it was almost like I felt a little bit like you said, the amount of information that she was able to download in that short amount of time. I was just like a little bit like, wow, okay. Yeah, I will definitely look forward to listening again, because I'm sure stuff that I missed.
So thank you so much for that, Elaine. And again, you can find her, more information about her and her lab and all the work that they're doing at irp.nih.gov. And what a fascinating conversation. So you can look at your dogs a little differently today, knowing what we know now. And just thank you to her for answering the question that I wanted to know. How are the Chihuahua and the Great Dane related? So thank you so much for that. And we will see you guys next time. Lots of love.
Yep. Take care.
Kindred is hosted by me and my sister Jen. Produced by Kat Gaddy and myself. Sound production and editing by Dan Cooper. Original music by Ellie Grace. And our Kindred artwork was created by Lindsay Coffin. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And feel free to contact us through our website at kindredpodcast.co, where you can also find links to our socials, Patreon page, and show notes.